Good morning, boys and girls. Welcome back. We're so glad you're here to keep studying the life of Esther with us. So last week it was just a lot of dialogue, a lot of back and forth, kind of like the telephone game, except thankfully they got it right, of messages going back and forth between Esther and Mordecai. And we left off with the fact that Esther had decided to obey at the cost of perishing. Now, Peter has our golden scepter with us again. Boys and girls, do you remember what we talked about last week about Esther? If the golden scepter is put out when she enters, that's good. If the king does not put out the golden scepter when she enters, that's it. It's the end. So she had not been called for 30 days. She had not been called before the king. So the likelihood of her being called in the next 3 was pretty slim to none. So we had left off the fact that she was fasting and praying and 3 days and 3 nights without food. And then she was going to go in before the king and see, yeah, I'd be pretty hungry. I'm not so sure if I'd be ready to walk in before the king then or not. Let's just say I'm really glad that God's called me to teach these lessons and not go before a king. So in Esther chapter 5, verse 1, it says, "Now it came to pass on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house, over against the gate of the house." So boys and girls, she doesn't go in there in her sackcloth and ashes looking like, woe is me, poor me. She gets herself dressed up in her royal apparel and she walks in. Verse 2, "And it was so, when the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter." Boys and girls, I'm sure it was probably a huge okay. Now, she still has a big mission to accomplish, but step number 1, that's right, Peter, she touched the top of it. Step number 1 completed. The scepter got held out. She was going to be able to deliver her message. Boys and girls, there was probably a little tense in there too. The other people, when they saw her, and they're like, oh boy, is the king going to accept her? Is he not going to accept her? So the king does hold out his scepter and he says, well, Esther, what is your request? What is it that you want? And he actually says, I'm willing to give you up to half the kingdom. So if you want X amount of money, you want this many houses, so much land, I'll give it to you, up to half of my kingdom. So he looked favorably enough to spare her life, and he's willing to say whatever it was that was so important for you to come see me, ask, and I'm willing to give it to you. Again, up to half the kingdom, basically, so he still had the most. But the king is actually quite happy to see her. So let's see what Esther asked for. Because if it were me, boys and girls, I probably, well, Peter knows, I would stumble over my words and it would take me a long time to get it out. But I would, yeah, Peter well knows from experience. But I probably would not have prolonged this as long as Esther does, and we're going to find out. I probably would have, again, hem-hawed and stumbled, but I would have gotten it out that day. Hello, I'm about to be killed, spare my life. But Esther does not take that approach. So let's look at verse number 4 and see what Esther asks for. So helps if you're actually in chapter 5, verse 4. "And Esther answered, if it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him." Haman? Her enemy? Again, I'm very thankful the Lord did not call me to do this. But it blows my mind in a sense. Now we're going to find out what happens, boys and girls. We get the end of the story. So I think sometimes we kind of forget to think about what it would have been like going through this. But she literally invites her enemy to come to dinner and treats him very special. Boys and girls, how often do we see an enemy? Now, our enemies, again, are out to seek our life, but there are people who do not treat us kindly. How often do we want to duck and go the other way, or we want to say something bad back about them, or but Esther invites him to dinner and treats him well. Now, boys and girls, does Haman know that Esther's a Jew? He doesn't. Does Haman know that Esther's related to Mordecai? He doesn't. But wow, if you are Haman, you just got invited to dinner with the king and the queen, and it's just you. You are feeling pretty special, pretty important. He's like, yeah, I get to have dinner with the king and the queen. He's feeling like this is pretty awesome. So they have their dinner. Verse 5, it says, then the king said, cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther hath said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. The king's like, tell Haman to hurry up. Esther asked for something. Haman better hurry up and get here. Verse 6, and the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, what is thy petition? Like, surely you didn't just come to ask me to dinner. Why are you doing this? And it shall be granted thee, and what is thy request? Even to the half of the kingdom, it shall be performed. He's like, all right, you didn't just want us to come for dinner. Why is it that you asked us to come? And I'll give you half, up to half my kingdom. Boys and girls, do you know what she asked for next? You know, because at that point, maybe you've heard the phrase, you fattened them up. Okay, you've gotten them ready for this request. And she comes back with, come back tomorrow. Let's have a second banquet. You and Haman, back tomorrow. Now, if I'm the king at this point, I'm like, what is going on? Like, why does she keep asking me for dinner? Haman, on the other hand, he's like, yes, dinner number 2 in the palace. I'm pretty important. And Haman goes walking out the gate. And who's in the gate, boys and girls? Yeah, Mordecai. And how do Haman and Mordecai feel? Yeah, they don't get along real well, to say the least. And always, guys, I tend to jump ahead of myself, but Haman is not happy when he passes Mordecai in the gate. Verse 9 says, then went Haman forth that day, joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. So Haman goes home. Verse 10, nevertheless, Haman refrained himself, and when he came home, he sent and called for his friends and Zeresh his wife. And Haman told them of the glory of his riches and of the multitude of his children and all the things that wherein the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the princes and servants of the king. Haman said, moreover, yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared but myself, and tomorrow I am invited unto her also with the king. Yet he lists all of these good things that are happening, all of these blessings, and he follows it with yet, which most of us today would follow that with but. He says, yet all this availeth me nothing. It's no good, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. There is one man who is sitting at the gate that he doesn't like, that he is letting ruin all of this good that's taking place. Well, Zeresh, his wife, and his friends want to comfort him, and so they come up with a plan in verse 14. Then said Zeresh his wife and all his friends unto him, let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak thou unto the king, that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. Then go thou in merrily with the king unto the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. He's like, all right, we have a solution. I am going to get this Mordecai taken care of. I'm going to build this gallows. I'm going to talk to the king about it. I have a plan, and now he feels like he's okay. Boys and girls, how often are we like Haman? So much is going good, so many positives, and we tend to focus on that one negative. Now, we're human. I understand it's natural, but boys and girls, that's why we're learning to correct it, okay? To be more spirit-filled, to be more like Christ. So often we can look at how much good is going on around us, and then we get so focused in on that negative, or that one person walks past us. And all of a sudden, our whole mood changes, our whole demeanor. We can be sitting there chatting with our friends, having a good time, and somebody walks up and we just close right down. Boys and girls, now, I also say that from experience. I'm human too. But how often do we do that? Do we let the people around us affect our joy, which really should be from Christ and not be related to people around us? As you go about your week, boys and girls, focus on things that are positive. I've made it a habit at the end of my day in my devotions to journal at least one thing I'm thankful for. And some days it's the same thing over and over. Lately I've been journaling how thankful I am for my class. I am loving teaching this school year. But I try to journal something I'm thankful for, because so often I can focus on what's negative, and then I kind of end my day thinking about something positive because I have so much to be thankful for. Boys and girls, as you go through this week, think about the things you can be thankful for and